Pay heed, all who enter, and beware this live edition of the Paid Podcast. I'm Nick Springer. I'm here with Kevin Flaherty. Rain or shine, win or lose, it don't matter. We here. We're going to talk about KU football and plenty more coming up.
Thanks for listening to KC Sports Network, proudly presented by Emprise Bank. If you're thinking about starting a business or know someone who is, check out Emprise Bank's SBA loans. It's always good to know your options, and they can be your partner in possible.
This is the Paid Podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network, a live edition on a Saturday evening after a Kansas football game. Well, actually, Kevin, was there a game today? I wasn't sure. I thought maybe it might have gotten canceled.
Yeah, weather, right? Helene.
Yeah.
Maybe they'll make it up sometime soon.
Yeah, I really just want to Men in Black myself, like that type of thing. That's the current vibe at the moment. If you are watching live on YouTube with us, as D Jones is here with pain, I feel that. If you're watching live on YouTube, be sure to subscribe, be sure to like, and be sure to drop a comment. And yeah, listen. Sometimes the best way to sort of make yourself feel better if you're feeling sad or pain is to do it together with friends. And this is a safe space. Safe space. It's okay. But long story short, KU's 1-4. It's a disaster. Dumpster fire. Sky is falling. The stupid little metaphor I used of like running off the cliff. Yeah, screw all that. We're down. We're dead. We're dead. I don't even know what's going on. We are so cooked.
Your Acme technology did not work.
Yeah, no, it's horrible. I'm Nick Springer. He's Kevin Flaherty. We're brought to you by Emprise Bank, your partner in all things possible, member FDIC. And Kansas sucks. Not really sure what else really to say beyond that. KU plays TCU at home at Arrowhead Stadium. They lose 38-27. I predicted 37-31 TCU would win, so I was pretty close.
Yep.
Unfortunately, my reverse psychology thought process failed. Because KU lost. So now, I'm right, but I wish I wasn't right. I want to be wrong, but I'm right. So that's annoying. As TCU comes in Arrowhead Stadium, first and foremost, I want to say great job to the fans. Fans showed out. The announced attendance was just under 48,000. It was 47,800. And it certainly looked that way. I think a lot of people will look at pictures or videos from the stadium and think there's no way there's 47,000 people there. You got to keep something in mind. When you have that many people spread out over the course of multiple decks of lower bowl and upper bowl, it can look a little more sparse. But overall, I thought the KU fans really showed up. The tailgating atmosphere was pretty cool. I actually went down to a tailgate to kind of check out the tailgating atmosphere. It was fun. People were excited. Obviously, this was before the game kicked off. So people had a reason to be excited. Now they don't. But yeah, so first and foremost, wanted to get that out of the way. And if you were at the game, the traffic was terrible getting home. I live in Lawrence, probably like a lot of people do that went to the game, and it was a disaster trying to get out of there. So that part, I guess that's just part of having a game at Arrowhead. I don't know. The bigger negative to that is that so many people obviously are coming specifically to Lawrence, which I think made the traffic worse. So that was a bit of a bummer. Other than that, though, I think from my perspective, the atmosphere seemed pretty good early in the game, obviously, when KU was fighting and had the lead early in the game. And so, just wanted to kick off the show with a quick little shout out to the fans that came out to support. The atmosphere, again, was good. I thought the tailgating stuff pregame was cool. But obviously didn't get the result they wanted. So, Kevin, KU is now 1-4. We need to do a full stop vibe check. What's your status?
The vibes are good, Nick. No, it's a frustrating thing because I think we've talked on this podcast a lot, and we talked just before we went on the podcast, and Lance Leipold referenced it today in his comments after the game. Nick, I would love it so much if it were one person or one thing where you could just say, hey, get that one person out or fix that one thing, and it would all be solved. I think I've been saying for a few weeks now, hey, when you watch the film, the thing that pops up is that it is a team thing, that it's different guys making mistakes at different times in different areas of the football game. Offense, defense. Today there was a special teams mistake that wound up being pretty big. And so it's not something that you can just sort of put your magic wand on it and say, oh, this is an easy fix. And I think that's the frustrating thing about it. You and I were talking specifically about the passing game, right? Because Jalen Daniels has not been sharp, and today was maybe the least sharp that he has been at times. And even when I say that, Nick, there were times when the routes weren't getting open, where he didn't really have a place to go with the ball. One of the plays like that was that second down and goal from the 6, where you max protected and put 2 guys into the pattern. Neither guy was open, and so he didn't have a place to go with the ball. There were a few times where he connected on some passes, and the pass was dropped. You think about the pass on the sideline that was just flat dropped. You think about the pass play that was originally ruled complete, then incomplete, then upheld as incomplete. You think about the deep ball to Quentin Skinner as well, although his legs got kind of tangled up, and that made what would have been maybe an easy catch a little bit more difficult. And you look at a week ago against West Virginia, all the pressure that Jalen Daniels faced in terms of the double-digit pressures and things like that. And none of that is to assign blame to one specific person. All of that is to say it's everybody, right? And it's people at different times messing up. And I think that's the frustrating thing, too, when you look at it and you say, okay, Jalen, the receivers got open on that play. Why didn't you connect with them? Or you say, okay, we got a guy open deep, but he can't make the throw because the pressure's there. Or Jalen does a really nice job of putting it on a receiver and he doesn't catch the ball. And all of those things together, it just seems like there have been very few downs this season, Nick, where it has all come together in the passing game, where every single part of that, the play call, the pass, the protection, and the catch / routes all work together, and the passing game came together.
Yeah, look, I want to start with the offense here, and we'll get to the defense, I'm sure, as well later on in the show. But I think KU is, to use another metaphor, KU is stuck between a rock and a hard place. Maybe like a rock, a hard place, a meat grinder, and I don't know, something else really.
Some of those little like video game spikes from like the old Nintendo games.
Yeah. See, now you're talking. And here's what I mean by that. Like, you look at Jeff Grimes, I think from a play calling perspective, this was probably his best game of the season. I guess that's a pretty low bar, all things considered. I've maintained that I don't think Jeff Grimes is like a bad or terrible coach, but obviously something is not working between him and Jalen Daniels and whatever the offense is trying to do. The play calling I thought was okay, was fine. There were some speed options in there, which I loved. That was great. But here's what I mean when I say that I think KU's in between a rock and a hard place right now, because you're 5 games in with Jeff Grimes. And even if you want to fire him, and I'm not saying that I do. I've never advocated for that, and I'm not really advocating for it now because I don't think it's realistic. I don't think it's realistic because KU just signed him. He's 5 games in, and his contract is probably going to be a situation where I don't know that KU can even like logistically afford to fire him if they wanted to. So the only other option I think at that point is, I guess, a demotion, and maybe you give the play calling to Jim Zabrowski. But to your point, that doesn't really solve like all the issues, right? Like that's not a guaranteed fix if you do that. So that's what I mean. I think on that aspect, when it comes to Jalen Daniels, that's a whole nother issue of, I think with Cole Ballard, like, you got to see him for one game with Kotelnicki schemed up, and listen, KU ran Wildcat for a lot of that game with Cole Ballard at quarterback against K-State. So I don't know what you're getting with Cole Ballard. When it comes to Isaiah Marshall, like, I don't think you want to throw him out there. And the issue with benching Jalen Daniels, and I think a lot of people will just come back to me and say, well, hey, the season's already over, so what does it matter? But, like, if you bench Jalen Daniels, like, there's no other way around it other than to be like, we are admitting the season is over. We're admitting that this is a complete wash. 2024 is a complete wash, complete failure, whatever. I don't know that as a program you can do that. You can make that decision. I don't know. So that's really where the issue comes, is that you start to look around. There's not very many real changes that I feel like KU can make at this point, that like real tangible changes that I think KU can make at this point that are going to make a difference this season, which is where I think the rock and the hard place situation comes into play. Cause it's like, it's pretty obvious that KU needs to do something. Like there needs to be some kind of change. But what that change should be and whether or not it would even make a difference at this point seems to be the real question that I have really about that. So I don't know. And then I think on top of that, when you look at Isaiah Marshall, if you wanted to be like, oh, let's play him and see what we have so that we know what we're doing in 2025, whatever, like at that point, you'd only want to play him 4 games because you don't want to probably lose his red shirt at that point. So you'd still have to play Cole Ballard, I guess. So I don't know. Al here in the chat, I kind of agree. Like again, it's the rock and hard place thing. Like I don't think you can realistically, logistically bench Jalen Daniels because of the implications of what it would mean, right? And again, I understand. I think for a lot of fans at this point, the season basically is already over, right? Like Tata and Hawk is in here saying, it's officially a failure, and I don't disagree with that. But like from a program standpoint, from what the implications of benching Jalen Daniels would mean, I just don't know that you can do that. Like, I just don't know that you can make that decision at this point.
Yeah, I agree with you. And the other part is, look, let's go from a negative to a positive to a negative. The negative compliment sandwich, I guess. The passing game has really struggled. The running game has been great at times. And Devin Neal, we all know, is a really special player. Daniel Highshaw looked really good at times today. The offensive line has looked really good blocking for the run at times. And at times we've seen Jalen Daniels look really good running the option and running around out there as well. The negative part of that and the other part of the sandwich going from the negative of the passing attack to the positive of the running game, Nick, they aren't running the ball well when they need to. And I think that's the other part of this is a lot of people just say, run the dang ball. And you see the Sandra Bullock from the blind side.
Run the damn ball.
Run the dang ball.
Well, hey, what do you think of that? What do you think of that?
I get it. But when you look at where Kansas has been this year, when they've needed to run the ball, when the other team has said, hey, we know you want to run the ball, you need to run the ball here, Kansas hasn't run the ball well in those situations. And so I get how people say, hey, I want to see more carries here. I want to do more with the running game, all of those things. The truth is that as great as the running game has been, they haven't executed as much in those situations. You look at the UNLV game that we've talked about, the UNLV game we talked about in the second half, right? When they were trying to protect Jalen and they were running the ball and being conservative, UNLV shut that down pretty easily. I don't think it's an F-bomb week, although I think we're pretty close. It's really, you have to understand, like, I don't curse that much in general. And so when I do curse, like an F-bomb coming out is like, it's pretty much for effect at that point where it's like, I have gone through all of my options and the F-bomb has to be there. T-Town brings up a good point about the running call sheet. It does look a little bit like that. You don't have the variance of the Kotelnicki running scheme, right? And everybody wanted to talk about, I know we're talking about the TCU loss in particular. Everybody wanted to talk about the way that the running game went at the end against West Virginia, where you run to the same side of the field 3 times. The truth is you only really have a problem with one of those, right? Because first down, you're running the ball to get the clock running. Second down, Nick, they may have had a first down if they blocked that thing correctly against West Virginia. It was the third down where it's, okay, do you really want to run zone to the outside, to the short side of the field on 3rd and 4? That's the problem that people have with it. But I do think that that's important to mention too, is as much as we want to sit here and say, hey, bro, the passing game ain't it. Run the ball. The running game hasn't been there enough when they've needed the running game to be there in order for them to just say, screw it, we're 95 Nebraska. The passing game is a myth.
Yeah, there is plenty more that I want to get to, including some of the comments that we've got in the chat here on our live YouTube show. By the way, once again, if you're watching us live, drop a comment, subscribe, like, and share your thoughts. We're going to get plenty more into this KU loss and what it means coming up here on the other side of this break. First, got to tell you about Home Field Apparel. Look, if you were at the game today and you were repping Home Field Apparel, you were doing it right, man, because Home Field Apparel always makes you look the cleanest with retro logos. I've got a couple favorite items that I have, including my Jayhawk joggers that I've talked about, the pants. It's getting close to sweatpants season. I'm going to be living in those things coming up, and you can too with Home Field Apparel. All you have to do is head to homefieldapparel.com, use promo code PAYHEAT24 to get 15% off your first order. That's PAYHEAT24 for 15% off your first order, and we are back in just a moment.
Looking for tickets for your next event? Tickets for Less is your #1 source. Save big on every purchase when you use promo code KCSN at ticketsforless.com.
That's right. This is the Paid Podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer here with Kevin Flaherty. Once again, if you are joining us live tonight for our live postgame show on YouTube, be sure to subscribe, be sure to like, be sure to drop a comment here for us. And there's plenty of comments that I want to get into actually here coming out of this break. First and foremost, going back to this one from AB earlier about KU being unable to close out halves games. Yeah, it's been the same thing every week, really, for this. And that was really where this game particularly turned. Well, I guess there was a couple of moments where this game turned. The biggest one for me, though, was late in the first half. O.J. Burroughs gets that interception, runs it back inside the 10. And from there, Kansas is unable to capitalize. It was a 14-14 game at that point. There's about, 3 minutes left in the first half, I think, when that play happens, or just under 3 minutes. Kansas can't score. Devin Neal doesn't touch the ball once inside the 10. That was maybe the real sequence of plays.
He wasn't in the game on any of those three plays.
That was probably the real sequence where I was really left scratching my head as to your best offensive player. I mean, forget about that. Like, you have Daniel Highshaw too. Like, I know they tried to run Daniel Highshaw on the first down play in that scenario, but maybe try to go back to it. Then they had the play in the end zone where it looked like there might have been some PI on the throw to Quentin Skinner, I think, but that wasn't called. Kansas forced to kick a field goal at 17-14. So you miss out on capitalizing with 6. But then beyond that, the momentum it gives to TCU, who then drives right down the field to score a touchdown to end the half, was absolutely killer. It was brutal. It looked like it was going to be 21-21 worst going into half if you were able to score 6. Instead, it's a 21-17 TCU leads. That was a real unfortunate scenario, I think, for KU. And again, really highlights kind of AB's point in the chat here of the constant struggle for Kansas at the end of halves and at the end of games for KU. And that kind of leads me to another point I wanted to talk about here, Kevin, and that is there is one thing that has me feeling optimistic. The problem is that one thing that has me feeling optimistic also is causing me deep concern. Here's what that is. Kansas is a talented team. They have talent. I don't think there's any denying that. When you look at the rest of Kansas's schedule, I don't see any games where Kansas is just going to get run off the field. Maybe like the K-State game. But, I mean, Colorado at home, Houston at home, at Arizona State. Like, these are all games that I think are going to be fairly close games. Like, I don't think KU is just going to get blown out of the water in some of these games. And so that gives me optimism in the sense that, okay, maybe KU can get into one of those games and the ball bounces your way and you're able to secure a win here and there, right? Like, the game at home against Iowa State should be interesting. At BYU suddenly looks way more difficult, but the Baylor game on the road, very winnable, I think. Colorado at home, again, I don't think KU's going to get blown out in that game. But here's the reason why that flips to a negative, is that we've seen Kansas play 4 consecutive close games. And what is their record in those 4 games? Oh, right. It's 0-4. Okay? So they have not proven that they can win close games. So even though I get this sense that I don't think Kansas is going to be getting run off the field in some of these upcoming games on their schedule, I also at the same time don't have any confidence in them to have any ability to win these close games. So this one thing that has me both somewhat optimistic versus also incredibly pessimistic, it's the same thing. It's like a catch-22. It's a very bizarre situation because I feel, again, that I don't think KU is going to get blown out in these games, but they haven't proven they can win a close game at all. And so that could be a difference between them going 6-6 and maybe going like 3-9 or 2-10 at this point. I don't know.
It's funny. One of the clips that we played on repeat this week was when you said, hey, these guys just need to find a way to go to a bowl game. And I said, they just need to win a ball game. And
they haven't done that yet, obviously.
And I think that's a big part of the reason why. I wasn't trying to be a wise ass or whatever when I said that. What I meant was just this is a team, and somebody brought up earlier, they were talking about the mental aspect of that with this team. And when I look at that, I think they're absolutely right. I think it is a mental game at this point. I think there's a mental block. I think, Brian Borland talked about this week, said, hey, we've got guys that are getting a little bit uptight in these big situations. And so when I say they just need to win a ball game, I'm not saying, because you suck and you can't go to a bowl. What I'm saying is that this team needs to get back on the right side of something, right? Whether that's something where Kansas comes out, puts together a perfect performance and blows somebody out of the water, whether that's them recovering a crazy fumble like the UNLV one and they wind up walking off the field where you say, man, they were lucky to win that game. They just need to be on the right side of that win column. And I think that could do them a lot of good because, like you said, there is talent on that team. And I do think that this is a team that if they can get past sort of what they're going through, you think of Bull Durham, right? And all the things that they try to do to pull themselves out of a slump, the Nuke LaLoosh wearing the garter and everything. I think that's kind of where Kansas is a little bit now, where you have to find something mentally to pull yourself out of that. And I think when they have a positive result, and remember, as Jalen Daniels said after the game today, this is not a team that looks at things from an outcome standpoint. They are a process-oriented thing. They need an outcome to go right in order for them to start getting back to where they feel good, whistling, walking around campus. And quite frankly, Nick, I think they need to do it this week against Arizona State. And Arizona State's a team that I think is a little bit better than we thought they'd be going into the season. I don't know that. Hey, that's a great suggestion and a fantastic scene in Bull Durham. I'm glad you're picking up what I'm putting down there. But the Arizona State game comes, then you have a bye week, and then you have Houston, who's obviously really struggling. You need something positive, I think, going into that bye week where you can say, okay, the streak is snapped. We got back on the right foot. Let's come out of the bye week really strong. And then potentially you could put 2 wins together with how much Houston is struggling. And so I know that the coaches always say there's no such thing as a must-win game because you're always going to play the next game and all that. I think the Arizona State game, Nick, is as close to a must-win game as we've had this season.
Look, momentum is a very, very powerful thing, and it's amplified in college football because you are dealing with 18 to 22, or I guess 23, or in some cases 24, or in Miami's case, like 27-year-olds. But the point being,
Rising's like 42. He's got 5 kids and a mortgage. I mean, come on.
The point being, you're dealing with in most cases 18 to 22-year-old guys, and momentum is a very, very powerful thing. It's a very, very powerful thing positively, and it's equally as powerful negatively. And Kansas obviously is on the negative side of that right now, where everything that can go wrong does go wrong for KU. You think about the punt return that TCU had for the touchdown. There was maybe a missed call and a block in the back, but it doesn't get called, and TCU returns it for a touchdown. But like at that point, KU, it was still a 3-point game. And that's really what's most frustrating about this game against TCU is you were +3 in turnover margin, and you lose by double digits. Like that on its own is kind of insane to think about.
They wound up +2, right? Because Jalen.
+2. Okay, I guess. Yeah.
But still, I mean, that was an end-of-game pick. And Leipold made the point. He goes, well, we should have probably had the fumble, too, that was overturned. But I'm right there with you. And Nick, I'll be honest with you. This is the first time this season that Kansas left the field where I thought the other team was just better than KU was. And like you said, they were plus in the turnover margin, still wind up losing by 11. Nick, TCU put up almost 2 full yards per play better than Kansas did. And remember, that doesn't count the punt return. So when you look at all of that, the turnovers allowed Kansas to stay in this game. And yes, Kansas had a shot at the end where they were there in the fourth quarter. It was a 28-27 game. There were opportunities there. I get all of that. If you're asking me, hey, walking off that field, who is the better team? This is the first time of that 4-game streak where I've just said, you know what? TCU was better today. And TCU deserved to win that football game with how much they outplayed Kansas in that game. The Illinois game, I thought Kansas gave it away. The UNLV game, Kansas had every chance there. I meant today, TCU was better than Kansas. And so when you look at last week against West Virginia, you're up 11 in the fourth quarter. I thought Kansas was better than West Virginia in that game and should have won that contest. This was the first time where I said, you know what? Kansas was outplayed. TCU's mistakes gave KU a chance in that one, but ultimately I thought TCU was better than Kansas was today.
Yeah, I mean, listen, Josh Hoover was unstoppable. I mean, 356 yards, 3 touchdowns. Yeah, he had a couple picks, but other than that, he was pretty much unstoppable. And even interestingly enough, TCU's run game kind of got it going later on in the game when they needed to. When they were running and KU knew they were running, it was actually when TCU's run game seemingly became the most effective. Was late in the game when it was pretty obvious they were going to try to run. And I don't know if at that point the defense for KU was just beat down and didn't have much fight left in them, but TCU ended up having some success running the ball later in the game as well. That really helped them also. So yeah, TCU outgained KU by over 150 yards. I think, over 500 to 350 for KU. So yeah, you take away the turnovers for TCU, and TCU might win this game by 20 or 30 points.
And again, that total yard, that doesn't include the really long punt return too. So it's I'm right there. I'm right there with you. And I think, and I'm sorry to cut you off there, but I did have to mention one of your favorite things did happen in this game, where TCU had a 12-play, 57-yard drive that's being referenced right there.
For touchdown Hawks,
6 minutes, 10 seconds, and resulted in a field goal. Those are the plays. I mean, this game, the defense struggled all the way through. Let's call it what it is. They were able to get a few turnovers that helped, but they really struggled to stop TCU. But all year long, Nick, the defense has not gotten off the field in money drives in the fourth quarter, and that was another example why. Where, hey, you're down 8. That's still a score and a 2-point conversion. The one thing you can't let them do is go down the field and make it a 2-score game. They went down the field and made it a 2-score game and ate up a ton of clock in the process.
Yeah, I do want to dive more into the defense here, but I also want to circle back to what you're referencing, where KU's down 28-24, and they go on a drive. Like, they get the ball down into near the TCU red zone. They have a 4th and 5 at the TCU 23. It's 28-24. At that point in the game, there's there's probably – trying to look at the box score here. There's 12 minutes left in the fourth quarter. It's 28-24, 4th and 5 at the 23 of TCU. I got to be honest. I think KU made a mistake there. Lance Leipold made a mistake there. I think KU should have gone for that based on how the game had unfolded, because in the back of my mind, I was pretty confident that KU was not going to be able to stop TCU, which, by the way, ended up becoming true as TCU went on that long drive that made it a 2-possession game. They went and scored actually on that next drive to make it an 8-point game. But I think KU should have probably gone for it there, because in my head, as that was unfolding, I was like, this is what's going to lose KU the game. Like, kicking this field goal is what's going to lose them the game. And obviously, if they don't get the 4th down, then they lose anyways. But I think that they probably should have gone for it on that particular play, on that 4th and 5 from the 23, that they chose not to go for and kick a field goal instead. I guess the one positive is KU has a kicker now. Turns out Tate Brown's just elite. I don't know what he's been doing the last 3 years. Why weren't we running him out to kick 3 years ago? He was good. He was good. But okay, let's talk more about this defense though. Like you were talking about some of the struggles they've had, and this was a bad game for the defense. Full stop. It was a bad game. They got lucky with some turnovers. There was a really bad pass from Josh Hoover that got intercepted. The interception that he threw, that O.J. Burrows had, that guy was wide open, and Hoover just lofted it like to the moon for no reason and gave Burrows plenty of time to get over there. If that ball's thrown more on a line, that's maybe a touchdown actually.
It was an arm punt. It was an arm punt.
Yeah, that was maybe more of a touchdown. Then you have the fumbles, obviously, which were good plays by KU, but overall, a bad game by the defense. They couldn't really stop anything. TCU pretty much seemingly they could do whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted for the most part. Whether it was RPO, whether it was slant routes in the middle of the field, whether it was, breaking tackles. This was by far KU's worst tackling performance of the season as a defense. There was a comment here talking about the tackles earlier from one of our commenters here on the live show on YouTube. By far the worst tackling game that KU has had this season. TCU scores a touchdown on a play where it was McAllister who catches it on it was sort of a busted play. KU got pressure, and Hoover throws it across the field to McAllister, who breaks a tackle from Mello Dotson, which, by the way, I reviewed that live, and I was talking about this, Kevin. On that play, Mello Dotson grabs a hold of McAllister, and he goes down. He's got the ball in his right hand. He puts his left hand on the turf. Fine. If you freeze frame it, it looks like his forearm was down on his with the football. And now, I don't know. I think forearm equals down. I don't know if it has to be like elbow, but anyways, it didn't matter. Obviously, I was wrong because they didn't review it, and it was a touchdown. So, but yeah, one of the worst tackling performances of the season for KU. Taiwan Berryhill revealed post game that his mom. It was his mom, right, Kevin?
His mom got married.
Yeah, his mother got married in Louisiana on last night, and he was there and flew back in early this morning for the game, and then ended up playing every snap because of some of the injuries that KU is dealing with at linebacker, most notably Cornell Wheeler, who was sorely missed today, certainly for Kansas. And Jason Gilliam, I don't think was able to really play much either, although he was active.
Logan Brantley out too. So
Brantley out, yeah. So
some of the guys that maybe would have sucked up some of those snaps with Cornell Wheeler out were also not really available.
Yeah, so Taiwan Berryhill talked about that in post game about how he got to Kansas City at like 9:30 this morning after flying in early, and then obviously like basically played a whole game. That's, I guess, I don't want to say like that as like an excuse for some of the defensive struggles, but that I guess it's noteworthy at the very least, I would say. But yeah, beyond that, really not a great game for KU defensively. They've almost got to go back to the drawing board on that side of the ball. I don't know what more they can do on that side, because they looked deflated. They were gashed whenever TCU wanted to. Bad game from the defense.
Yeah, I think so. And now that's 2 in a row. And up to that point, I think we talked about the defense mostly playing really well, but also giving up those money drives that we were talking about, where it was, hey, they're playing really well, but they're also getting hurt at the end. And that's a great question by AB there. And our discussion on the defense is why I would say Austin Booker. I know some people would say, oh, Jason Bean. I'm not sure Jason Bean would have a lot more success with the way things have been and the options out there. I do think Jalen's been in a little bit of a slump, but I'm not sure that would be as big an upgrade as maybe people think. I think Dominic Pooney would be somebody I would consider, based on the fact that they've been allowing more pressure, and that allows Bryce Cabledew to move back to right tackle where he's a little bit more comfortable. Kenny Logan, obviously, you look at that, you look at the versatility that Craig Young had, but quite frankly, Nick, being able to bring in Austin Booker, a guy that you could just chalk up, this guy's going to get after the quarterback and allow us to potentially get to the quarterback with 4 guys. I think that would be so much more valuable than sort of anything else that they could add from that team.
I'll throw out something a little bit unorthodox.
All right.
And I'm not saying that I would go with this player, but I think it's something to consider. Rich Miller. And here's why. KU, it seems to me, is very obviously missing a on-field player leadership right now, especially in this game against TCU. KU looked dejected. The body language was poor. They didn't really have much fight late in the game. It really felt like the offense was just out there, and everybody in the stadium knew the offense was not going to do anything. Like, there was just no juice. There was no energy. KU didn't have it. So I would throw out 2 guys, Rich Miller or Mike Nowitzki, because I think those are 2 guys that are from a leadership perspective, very, very sorely missed from this team. And I don't think they have anybody that's been able to step into that role, right? And listen, I don't think there was anybody that was talked about more in the preseason during fall camp than Rich Miller. Like, you ask any defensive player, you ask Brian Borland, Rich Miller inevitably came up during conversation of, hey, Rich Miller was a great leader for us. Rich Miller did this, Rich Miller did that. He would, and setting aside how he was as a player on the field, right? Like, obviously, I don't think Rich Miller was one of KU's best linebackers, and I don't know that he would really add much in terms of on the field really to this team. But it's very obvious that KU is missing that player-led aspect of this team, right? They just don't have it. Devin Neal is an excellent player, obviously, and he's an incredible advocate for the university, and obviously being from Lawrence. But and then you throw in Jalen Daniels, and you look at the wide receivers, and you look at the defense. Like, Cornell Wheeler, I think, is doing a hell of a job and stepping up and trying to fill that role, but it's not enough. It's not enough. KU feels like they are still desperately missing that aspect of the team, and it felt like Rich Miller and Mike Nowitzki, the two of those guys, defensively and offensively, were the two that were most driving that culture, and KU's missing that now, because at the end of this game today against TCU, like I said, KU had no juice. There was no energy. KU was done. They were done. Everybody in the stadium knew they were done. There was no question about it that they were cooked, that they were not going to be able to come back in this game. And I think that starts with the mental thing, right? Going back to one of the comments we had earlier about the mentals, like, that's a mental thing, and that's something that somebody on the field, I think, yeah, you can take coaching, Lance Leipold, Jeff Grimes, Brian Boland, all that stuff, set it aside. Like, somebody on the field has got to step up and bring that energy and bring that leadership, and it just feels like it's missing from this KU team. Right now.
It's funny you say that, just because when people talk about cutting the head off the snake, right, and the way that can really impact or hurt somebody in warfare and, in football and whatever. Look at the way that Kansas responded to Jalen Daniels against West Virginia, not this year, but 2 years ago, when they had to make a comeback and make a drive down the field. Look at the way that they responded to Jalen Daniels against Arkansas. And I think when Jalen got into that huddle, I feel like it was apparent that everybody felt like, okay, we got a chance. 6 is going to get us there. And I think that
is gone. That is gone.
And I think they were willing to respond to that. And they felt like, even against Arkansas in that bowl game, where they were so down from a scoring standpoint. I mean, down 25 points was it at one point? When you, at the same time, they had that belief that it's okay. Like, we still got a shot. If 6 is on, we got a chance. And I think that it's not from a leadership standpoint that Jalen is lacking, I think it's really hard when you go out there in the second game of the season, you go out against UNLV, you go out a week ago, and Jalen Daniels is in these situations where, hey, this is where he's going to lead us down the field and lead us to a win. And that guy's struggling. He's slumping. He's not being accurate. He's not making all the right reads. And I think that part of the leadership, I feel like, can't be overstated, because I think that coaches talk all the time that you can be a great leader, and if you're not playing or not playing well, you're not going to have the same impact as somebody who's really balling out also having that. And I think that Kansas, for better or worse, kind of linked to Jalen's personality, where he was always so upbeat, and he was always, hey, we're going to get him here. And they believed. They knew that, hey, we can do this, because Jalen's going to give us a chance to do this. When you've had the start to the season that Jalen has had, when you've had opportunities to come back down the field, even if they weren't great opportunities, you still had those opportunities where you're on the field with a chance, and they aren't going your way. I think to some extent that leads to dejection, and you kind of saying, okay, well, what do we do now?
Yeah, look, if you're a process-driven team / program, which is what KU and Lance Leipold professes themselves to be, if you're not getting positive outcomes and you start to doubt the process, it's like a house of cards. That whole thing, that it all collapses. And that's where KU is at right now. Like, yes, you can say all the right things outwardly. You can say, you know, we're not outcome based, we're process driven. But if the process is not working, then guess what? You're starting to doubt that process, and then it just erodes the whole thing, and the whole thing comes crashing down. So, you know, this is a great comment here from D. Jones, which is very true. I mean, you said this on the show, Kevin, about Jalen Daniels, and that this team was going to be able to go as far as he could go, right? Yeah. I mean, that was kind of how it was always going to be to start the season. And setting aside all of the other things that happened or things that have happened with KU, with Jeff Grimes, with some of the struggles defensively, so on and so forth, right? It really does kind of circle back to Jalen Daniels in a lot of ways because of that. AB here, the attendance, was just under 48,000, so 47,800, I think was the
I think it was like 920 or something like that. It was like
47.9, 47.8 around there. And I mentioned at the top of the show, I thought the attendance was really good. You know, you may look at pictures and people say, "Oh, it looks empty." Well, listen, when you got a 75,000 person stadium and 47,000 people are spread out throughout the whole stadium, it's going to look not as full. But and to me, I thought it looked pretty good.
Yep.
I think KU fans showed out. I think KU fans showed their support. They did what they could. Obviously,
there were a lot of recruits there too. I mean, it was, and I know people will be like, "Oh my gosh, you know, you don't want the recruits to be there for that." Obviously, recruiting never stops, and a lot of times these visits are set up well in advance. But they did have a lot of guys coming, and from the guys that we talked to, some of you guys know I do another podcast with KCSN called Verbal Commitment, where we look at a lot of the high school kids, and there was a lot of excitement from a lot of those kids, Nick, to come and see Kansas play at Arrowhead, and so I think that's part of it. I want to get into that comment from Mr. Monkey Says there on the refs, because he talked about it at the end of the game, and a fine is coming. I don't know if you guys paid attention to the press conference. He basically said, "The heck with the fine. I'm going to say what I'm going to say." And he referenced the fact that Sonny Dykes was ejected from a game a week ago, TCU's coach. He said, "I guess it's my turn to be really mad at the officials." And he went on to say officiating is a problem in the Big 12. It's a problem. We all know it. He said something like, "That's why the conference office is here today." I mean, he took it pretty far and mentioned that I think the call specifically that he was referencing, although he did also talk about the potential block in the back on the big punt return, was the catch by Lawrence Arnold, where, you know, Jalen threw it. The referee who was closest to it called it a catch. The official who was further away from it called it incomplete. They wound up saying it was incomplete, which was huge, because they went to review. They couldn't determine one way or another, so the call stood. If they had gone by the initial coach saying, "Hey, it was a catch," it would have stood, and it would have been a catch. And Leipold was really hot there. I think he was pretty frustrated about that, Nick, in that, as we saw in the press box, we're watching the game, but we also have the ESPN Plus broadcast up so that we can follow the replays and everything. He said between the third and fourth quarters, he goes, "We can't get a call." He said that right there on the broadcast in his interview between. And so I do think Leipold gets after the officials a lot. I don't think that surprises anybody in this chat. It's pretty much an every week thing. I think he was extra hot this week because of the way those calls came, the way that they seemed to happen in a row, where you had the Lawrence Arnold catch, non-catch, you had the fumble that KU recovered that was overturned, and then you had the missed block in the back, all within a pretty small area. I do think that Leipold was pretty furious at that. As far as the Lincoln Cure thing, there's a question on there from AB about what he was doing at the game. Pretty sure he was just there to see Leighton play. I know that there are a lot of people wondering what Lincoln Kira is doing in his recruitment. Some people talked about maybe him visiting Oregon. That's a recruitment that I followed quite a bit. I've talked with the family. Ryan, who's with me on verbal commitment, also talked with the family. I don't think he takes a visit to Oregon. I think he sticks with Kansas State. He was wearing a KU hat, but ultimately at this point, I would still expect Lincoln to be a Wildcat.
Yeah, going back to the Lance Leipold discussion, I said my piece on this, I think after the UNLV game, live actually on this very show, live after the UNLV game, which is, from my perspective, the railing against the officials, it rubs me the wrong way. It gets really, really old. I'm really tired of it. Like, sure, there was some bad calls, fine, whatever. But you got to get over that, man. You got to focus on trying to coach your team in a close game and just suck it up, right? Like, I don't know. It's I wouldn't say it's always bothered me, but it certainly bothers me a lot more when you're losing games. Then it really pisses me off, actually, when you're just losing games and all I have to do is hear how you just hate the officials. Like, we get it, okay? I can see you stomping around mad as hell on the sideline, doing everything except coaching because you're just yelling at the officials. So
I think you get diminishing returns too, right? Like if it's
exactly.
If you're a guy that's not constantly riding the officials, and then you start riding the officials, there's more impact as opposed to when officials go into it and they're like, "Well, I got this coach today. He's gonna ride me, this whole time." And maybe that's a good point. And that was actually something that Lance said as well when he was going through all that. He was kind of like, look, like those were huge calls, but we needed to play better. And
breaking news.
I do think he was frustrated with those calls and specifically when they came in terms of that tight ball game. But ultimately, Kansas didn't lose this game because of the officials. KU lost this game because TCU outplayed Kansas, because Kansas's defense couldn't get a stop, because Kansas allowed an explosive play to a wide receiver in a close game where he was able to break a tackle and go to the house, because then after that, with trailing by 8, they didn't get a chance to move the ball and score. And then they let TCU run the ball all the way down the field over 6 minutes and make it a 2-score game. They lost because of what happened on the field. The officiating stuff, it's frustrating, and you can say to some extent, hey, that cost us a chance, but you shouldn't need the officials to give you your chance. And I think that this was a game that if you look at it objectively, I think TCU outplayed Kansas.
Look, I always say officiating, it's like the weather. You just have to deal with it. You just have to, it is what it is, right? Like, do I think the catch, no catch to Lawrence Arnold was a bad call? Yes, fine, sure, whatever. Was there a missed block in the back? Sure, fine, whatever. But I could probably find some plays that went KU's way that didn't get called whatever in KU's favor also if I was from the TCU perspective. So I think a lot of times it usually kind of washes out. But, there was some unfortunate calls against KU in this game. But to your point, that's not what lost in the game. I think the other thing you mentioned was, look, you go down 35-27 after you kick the field goal when you could have gone for it on 4th and 5, and you immediately go 3 and out and punt the ball right back to TCU in an 8-point game, middle of the 4th quarter. Like, that was another point in the game where it felt like the game was lost at that moment also. So, obviously a very disappointing game for KU, incredibly frustrating. I don't even know where to go from here. I mean, KU's 1-4, 0-2 in conference. I think the general sense is that this season is over, but kind of like I talked about earlier in the show, I don't know, like, on one hand, it's obvious that KU should try to make a change, but on the other hand, like, any change they could or tried to make, I don't really know how much it would actually make a difference. So it's like, okay, well, do you keep pounding your head into the wall and expecting a different outcome, or do you try to make some drastic change? And, what do you do if that case? Like, I don't know. It's a very bad situation. The other thing I wanted to mention here, Kevin, is even the most pessimistic of fans, okay, like, I'm a very optimistic guy, obviously. I'm the idiot who said KU would go 11-1. I'm the idiot who, growing up watching Chiefs games as a Chiefs fan, I thought the Chiefs could go make the playoffs every year. Wrong, idiot. I picked them to go 11-1. Wrong, idiot. You're optimistic as well. I'll say this though. Even the most pessimistic KU fan, if you could travel back in time before the Lindenwood game, I think even the most negative, pessimistic KU fan would say, hey, maybe we're like 2-3, right, to start the year. Like we go and lose at West Virginia. We lose maybe to like Illinois on the road, but we beat UNLV or whatever. And maybe we, whatever. We're like 2-3 or whatever. That's like worst case. That's the crazy part, is that this is somehow significantly worse than any worst case scenario I think you could possibly think of outside of like a player getting injured. Like this is as bad as it gets for KU. And that's the thing, is like there isn't an obvious thing to point to. Like, again, you can look at Jeff Grimes and you can look at Jalen Daniels and you can look at the defense, whatever, but it's like it's not obvious that that's any one of those things is the reason why. It's a culmination of all that stuff.
Yeah, and up until this game, it was frustrating because it was a culmination of all of that stuff, and you were still only losing by a score a game. And so it was really easy to say, well, gosh, if he just calls a different third down play, we win that game. If Jalen just makes this pass, we win this game. If the defense just did this, we win this game. And this was one where I thought Kansas just really struggled to stop TCU on one end. And on the other, the passing game just wasn't crisp at all. The running game, again, when it came down to it and you had to run the ball more effectively, I think they struggled there. It was interesting, Nick, neither positively or negatively, they've continued to rotate really heavily on the offensive line. And, Calvin Clements was out there at left tackle. They moved Bryce Cabledew over to right tackle. Leipold said after the game that was just a rotational thing. But you do wonder a little bit if they're kind of searching for something to make sure, hey, what can we do to where our guys are fresh in the fourth quarter? And I wonder if that was almost kind of playing the piano keys there to see if they could play that song.
Well, and look, I also just flat out think that Bryce Cabledew does not want to play left tackle. Like, I just think that that's the case. So that's obviously not good. Like, you've got Bryce Cabledew, you got Logan Brown. Like, somebody's got to play left tackle. So I think that's part of the issue there. Mr. Monkey says with a good comment here, like, yeah, I don't think William Shakespeare himself could write a tragedy this bad. Which, hey, listen, the script is still being written, as Lance Leipold said earlier in the week.
Hold on. You think that this season is worse than Othello or Romeo and Juliet? Like,
yes.
I feel like, yeah.
But to this point, yes.
So you're saying basically that English teachers should start teaching the 2024 Kansas Jayhawks as
absolutely
the example of
it's like the prince who's like about to become a king. I don't know what the like analogy would be, but it's like, he's a young prince who KU coming off the 9-4 season, like he's ready to claim his throne, and then like I don't know, something happens and he all this bad stuff happens to him, I guess. I don't know. Look, I'm not Shakespeare. Why are you putting this on me? I'm not Shakespeare. I'm not writing this shit, man. I don't know.
Oh, it's funny. I know Robert just asked what the worst case scenario is. And I think that whenever you get to a spot like this, everybody wants to say like, okay, are we at the bottom? Are we still falling? How deep does this pit go? And I think that looking at it from a wins and losses standpoint specifically, I think it's probably 2-10. I think you beat Houston and lose the rest of them. And that somebody may say, hey, you might not beat Houston, but I do think Houston's roster is depleted enough that I think that 2-10 is maybe the bottom. But I really think the worst case scenario, and I'm going to knock on wood. The table that my laptop is on is actually wood, so you can trust that I did, in fact, just knock on wood. I think the really worst case scenario would be if this is something that sets the program back multiple years. If you have a bad season this year, if that means that Kansas can't hit the transfer portal to the extent that they want to hit after the season, because you still have 30 seniors. I think the Jalen Daniels scenario is one of the most fascinating things about this, right? Because when you look at Jalen, people forget this or don't want to remember it. Jalen's got another year if he chooses to use it. And I know a lot of people say, hey, after this year, let's move on it and be friends or whatever. Jalen's best option might be to return to Kansas based on how his season is going this year. It wouldn't be to go to the NFL. The transfer portal market certainly probably wouldn't be what it has been in recent years. And even beyond that, I think Jalen deserves some credit because he has been a loyal guy, through all of this. But I'm just saying, if it's a situation where you're looking at this year and saying, is there a wins or loss number that could be worst case scenario is that it lasts beyond this season, that it's something that you really struggle to come back from. And I'm not saying that it will. We're literally asking, where is the bottom of this thing? I don't think they're going to go 2-10. I think that it's going to be better than that. But you asked where the bottom was, and I'm trying to tell you, like, hey, this is the absolute horror story of where this thing goes. I think in a lot of ways, Nick, you think about where Oklahoma State was a year ago and where they were the year before that, where everything kind of went wrong. They had, and I'm not saying there are bad characters on this KU team, far from it. I think there are a lot of good kids on this team, but they lost a ton to the portal. And Gundy was just kind of like, I think we'll be better because I like the makeup of my team better. And they went to the Big 12 title game. I'm not saying next year's KU team is going to go to the Big 12 title game at all. What I am saying is that with the way that things are going, with what the culture is inside the program overall, I do think that there's going to be some level of bounce back to where they're at right now. But does it come this season? Does it come after the offseason when you have the roster reset? You have a lot of new faces in it, and they can kind of, start over again on the chalkboard. I think that's going to be the interesting thing. I personally, and you mentioned I'm an optimist, Nick, I personally think the bounce back is going to come during this season, and they're going to be able to build a little bit more positive momentum.
Yeah, I think the caveat to everything you just kind of said there is that this team this year has 30 seniors. Yep. So I don't think there's any scenario where this is somehow a situation where KU is going to be better next season. Like everything was building towards this season, 2024. Everything. It was all supposed to culminate to this season. That I think is a lot of the issue that I think I have and a lot of other KU fans have is, hey, look, we recognize that next year there's going to be a lot of new faces, which could mean that it could be a little bit more up and down, which is why this was supposed to be the year. Sure. And instead, you've absolutely just completely wasted it to this point.
That's the frustration level. That's it right there. You just, keep going by all means, but I'm saying like that. If somebody wants to know why KU fans are upset right now, that's it. It's not that they're 1-4. It's that this was the year, right?
Yes.
You're ranked in the preseason. You are a dark horse Big 12 contender, which means by proxy now with the college football playoff, you're a dark horse college football playoff contender.
That was childish. That was childish to think.
Hey, obviously you could do all this. And so to get off to the 1-4 start and the way that it's gone, where, if they had been losing some close games, but Jalen had been playing well and you're kind of like, okay, I see the turn coming, it might even be a little bit different than it is. But that's the thing, Nick, is just KU fans want this so badly, and they want this team to succeed, and they want this group of guys to succeed, and they want Lance Leipold to be the forever coach and figure it out and everything go right. And so to be so emotionally invested after so many years of getting kicked while you're down and kicked while you're down, and then have the rug pulled out from you, I think you put it really well. That's where so much of the frustration lies.
Oh yeah, dude. The start of this season has been a significantly bigger kick in the nuts than any of 2010, 2011, 2012, any of the last 12 years. This has been significantly worse. Part of the reason is because of the talent level that KU has, right? I mean, so many years in the 2010s, it didn't hurt that much because you became numb to it. You expected KU to lose. You knew KU was going to lose. And it's supposed to be different now. Like the past 3 years of Lance Leipold and what's been building, that was all supposed to be wiped away, right? Like the new era stuff. Oh, new era this, new era that. Well, guess what? It's looking a lot like the old era right now. So that sucks.
Meet the new boss, same as the old boss, as
yeah,
the dude said. Yeah.
Yeah, man, it's brutal. It's absolutely brutal. And yeah, Robert came in here. We talked about the trivia on the show, Robert. But yeah, I think when you consider what changes KU could make at this point, it's Jalen Daniels and Jeff Grimes. But again, KU's between a rock and a hard place with those decisions. Like I don't know. I'm at a loss really, and I'm sure maybe even inside some of the KU football staff offices, they're at a loss as well about what's gone wrong this season. So. KU's going to be on the road against Arizona State in Tempe, which, by the way, it's supposed to be like 105 degrees for that game. So that sucks. It's going to be hot as hell. So that'll be something to keep in mind when they play at Arizona State. Then they'll have a bye and a chance to play Houston, who is the worst team in the Big 12. Mr. Monkey says, hey, false hope. KU wins the rest of the games of the Big 12 championship game. That could be true. That could be true, actually. The Big 12 right now is absolutely wild. It's chaos. It's like besides Utah, it is absolute banana land what's happening in the Big 12 week in and week out, game in and game out in terms of what's happening. So, again, that goes back to the whole point of it's like simultaneously a positive and a negative that the Big 12 is crazy because it feels like KU's going to be in every game they play, but they haven't proven they can win any game they played in because they're 0-4 in their last 4 one-possession. Well, this wasn't a one-possession game. It was a 2-possession game. They're 0-3 in one-possession games, plus the game they had against TCU today. Like, it's just, it's brutal.
Somebody mentioned earlier, Colorado putting it on UCF, and that's why I don't put anything into those, right? Because you have BYU probably should have lost to Baylor today, and BYU absolutely kicked the holy crud out of K-State a week ago. Don't worry in the Big 12 this year about transitive property because it doesn't exist. Teams are going to play well some weeks. They're not going to play as well other weeks. We're like 2 weeks in to conference play, and there's no way that you can accurately look at these group of teams and say this team is definitively better
except for Utah
than that team. Utah is pretty good, but even Utah wound up being close with Oklahoma State, and Oklahoma State got housed by K-State, who got housed by BYU. So it's all over the place, and so it's hard to tell. And that's one of the reasons that I think there is a little bit of optimism with KU is it's, hey, Devin Neal said it today. He goes, every week we've been talking about we had that and we let it slip away, basically. If Kansas fixes those things, those little things, as you said, Nick, I'm not sure there's a team left on the schedule that I go in and I'm just like, oh my gosh, that team is going to absolutely railroad Kansas. And so if you get this team playing with confidence, if you find a way to get a win against Arizona State, you go into the bye, you beat Houston, there's a chance that this thing does start to turn with a little bit of positivity. To Mitchell's question about the 2025, I know that that's I know that that's a ways out, but we are paid to look at this. So next year, theoretically, some will depend on quarterback. Obviously, do you bring Jalen back? Is it time to turn the page to Isaiah Marshall? Is it a guy that we've talked to in David McComb, who's coming in as a true freshman and is a really good thrower? Whoever it is, KU's slated to return, I think, 4 offensive line starters next year, which is a huge thing. That doesn't include Calvin Clements, who has started in the past, obviously started against UNLV. And on the defensive line, you're returning, I think, 3 starters along with most of your quality depth. And so where you're missing guys is going to be at skill positions on the back end of the defense. And those are some areas where Kansas has maybe recruited fairly well. Wide receiver, to me, is maybe the biggest question mark. When you lose, Skinner, Grimes, and Arnold, you should have Doug Emilion back. You should get Keaton Kubeka, who's been hurt this year, but would be in the rotation if he wasn't hurt. And so theoretically, if you're good on both lines and you get good quarterback play, if Jalen's able to figure it out, you might be kind of okay. But there are a lot of question marks around the lines and quarterback. And right now, quite frankly, Nick, there's a question at quarterback.
Well, like you said earlier, Kevin, forget about 2025. Let's just go win next week. Okay. I don't want to hear about 2025. I want to go win a damn game. Okay.
Hey.
So let's try doing that first.
I am all for that. Like I said, I think so much of this will be determined by, can they just have something go right? And that's not saying that it needs to be something passive that happens to them that goes right, like a lucky bounce. But can they come out and play well against Arizona State and get a win? And I realize it's one game. If they do that, Nick, this thing could be in the process of turning, because I really think right now it is so mental. It is such a block that, hey, things are just going to go wrong. I know they're going to go wrong. That to have something go right, to win a dang football game, could be really big for this team in terms of turning things around in their overall outlook for the rest of the season.
A huge thank you to everyone that was in the chat with us live during our post-game show tonight. Big thank you to everybody that dropped their comments. If you're joining us live, be sure to subscribe. If you're watching afterwards, be sure to subscribe, like, drop a comment, share your thoughts as well. You can also contact us via the Mint Mobile hotline. That's right, the KCSN Mint Mobile hotline at 913-407-6524, 913-407-6524. If you're listening after the fact and want to join in on the conversation, hit us up on the KCSN Mint Mobile hotline. Once again, huge thank you to everybody in the chat tonight for joining us. You guys are awesome. Thanks so much for continuing to join us after these games. Look, rain or shine, win or lose, hell or high water, we will be here. I'm not leaving. I'll be here. We'll be here talking KU football. No matter how bad it gets, no matter how good it is, we'll be here week in and week out talking KU football. We'll be back later this week with a more in-depth breakdown of Arizona State. That's KU's next opponent on the road in Tempe. We'll be talking about that a lot more. There are some positives, Kevin. KU volleyball is in the top 10 in the country, by the way. They are elite as hell. Oh, my gosh. If you haven't had the chance, go to Horsch Family Volleyball Center and watch KU volleyball.
We had Nate Lee on the podcast, the women's soccer coach. They had a 4-0 win the other day.
Yep, KU women's soccer is doing great.
That's a cool complex too out there at Rock Chalk Park, and it's cool to catch a women's soccer game out there if you haven't already.
So it is not all doom and gloom and sadness and pain and suffering for KU athletics. So be sure to keep an eye on all that stuff. Obviously, keep an eye out on here with us on the Paid Podcast and on Kansas Jayhawks KCSN on YouTube. Subscribe, like. And also follow us on the audio side as well on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. But once again, thanks so much to the chat for jumping in with us here tonight. And we will talk to you again soon. Until then, he's Kevin Flaherty. I'm Nick Springer. Everyone, try to walk back off the cliff a little bit. That's what I'm going to try to do. Take care, and we will talk to you again soon. See ya.